Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So we're going to jump through some of this because I had actually added a little bit of the building inspector stuff, and I know most of us that are in here are probably more trades, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, which is really what this was supposed to be. And we were trying to get it approved, so I added the occupational code stuff in there for the building too. So we'll sneak through some of that just to kind of move forward a little quicker. If anybody has questions, I think you can put the message in there for me, and hopefully I see it, or just turn your microphone on. Either way. All right, so we'll just blow through this real quick. Residential builder, I'm sure we all know who that is. A lot of people don't realize that there's also maintenance and alterations contractor. That's where they are specific. So you see a lot of your concrete guys have maintenance and alteration licenses for B for concrete. So they do go through. I know there's a lot of people that say you can't write workmanship. That's not true. The workmanship's been moved over into the occupational code, and there is some in our Act 409 also. That's, this kind of goes through things that are, um, how to make complaints and things like that. So I'm sure we've all seen in each of the sections, I did put in the work exempt from permits, just so we can kind of have something to talk about. This would be the building side, things that are exempt from the from permitting on the building side. So let's jump into it now. So Article 7 of Act 407 is the electricians and electrical contractors. So they did start out with putting in the examination fee, which is $100. And that goes for master, electrical contractor, electrical journeyman, fire alarm contractor, fire alarm specialty, assigned specialty, and assigned specialist. So under electrical, those are the different categories that you have for the electrical contractors. So the electrical contractor's license requires an individual to either hold the master license or have at least one full-time employee who is a master that resides in the state. So the electrical contractor does not necessarily have to be a master. He can be the master, most of them are, but he has to at least have one master electrician as his employee under that electrical contractor's license. You can only be a master for one contractor. Master electricians, they're they'll issue the master to an individual who's at least 22 years old, meets all the requirements described in Article 2, has at least 12,000 hours of experience that was obtained over 6 years. So you got to be 6-year journeyman before you can do your master's. Uh, and you've held the journeyman license for at least 2 of those 6 years. Um, Holder of the master license cannot be used to meet the eligibility requirements described in 711A or B for more than one electrical contractor. So you can only be a master for one electrical contractor. Uh, that is not a big deal on the electrical side. Most of our electrical contractors out there are pretty good at following the rules. The mechanical guys and the plumbing guys seem to be the ones we have a hard time getting them to follow rules. So then it goes on with the electrical journeyman's license. So you have to have at least 8,000 hours of experience over 4 years as an apprentice to be licensed as an apprentice. So the apprentices also have to get registered so that way they can get their hours in. And then they'll issue the certificate of registration, seeking registration under the section for that. So this is a big one. When I put this through to the state, they asked me to make sure that I kind of went over this in there. The ratio of electrical journeymen or master electricians to registered apprentices shall be one master or journeyman for each 3 apprentices on the job site. So when I was talking to the state, I asked them, well, most of the guys that are going to be taking this aren't going to be electricians. I mean, I will have some electricians. They said, well, what we have to realize is that typically the electrical inspector is not on site when these guys are doing work. So as licensed inspectors, if we show up on a site and we see, 12 people out there doing electrical work, we are allowed to go and find out who the journeyman is, find out how many journeymen are on site. We can also ask them for their license and their identification to prove it. So that's per the state of Michigan. Any inspector can ask for proof under number 3 and can report violations to the state. So even if you're a mechanical inspector or plumbing inspector or a building inspector, if you show up and there's, 15 electricians on site, you are well within the law to ask them to show they've got the right number of people on site. I know many of us probably wouldn't spend a lot of time to do that unless, we figured out that there was a problem. But uh, under the MCL 5201, at the request of the building official, inspector, or employee of the enforcing agency, so even, I guess, an ordinance officer could probably still do the same thing. And if they have the wrong amount of people on site, we can report them to the state for that. So under electrical, you've got a couple different classifications, very similar to the other trades. So we have fire alarm contractor, a license. They do all the fire alarm stuff, but they cannot do line voltage. So they're strictly on the fire alarm side, and they have pretty much the same requirements of specialty technicians license before they can become a fire alarm contractor. And then the specialty apprentice for the fire alarms also. Same thing, fire alarm specialty technicians to registered fire alarm apprentices, one technician to two apprentices. And it goes pretty much the same thing as what we have. So the specialty license person that holds a valid electrical contractor's license, master electrician's license, or journeyman license is not required to hold the specialty license. So if you are a master electrician or a full electrical contractor, you can do the fire alarm, you can do everything. But otherwise you need that specialty license. Same thing with your sign contractors, pretty much run the same all the way through with what we have. Um, So the sign, same thing with the sign specialist. They get to connect for the means of disconnecting and move forward. Um, so this part's a little bit nice. It clears up a few things. So municipal registration requirements shall be reciprocal between municipalities. So in the electrical side, they still have the city of Detroit, for example, that is issuing electrical contractors, masters, and journeyman and apprentice licenses. I think they're the last one in the state that are still doing that. So we have to accept those licenses as the authority having jurisdiction. They come in with a City of Detroit contractor's license. It's the same thing as if they had um, a license issued by the state of Michigan. I actually kind of got into an argument with the guy over that, and the state gave me the wrong information. I had to call him back again because I hadn't seen one in so many years. I didn't realize that Detroit was still issuing them. But yeah, if they have a City of Detroit contractors, master, journeyman, or apprentice, that's the same thing as anybody else getting it. Um, so that's by ordinance. The municipality could still require, but it has to be at least as stringent as the state. So that's why most cities just aren't doing it anymore. Um, So the electrical contractor license required classes of work, except as otherwise provided in the article. Person shall not engage in the business of electric contracting. Um, so license is not required to perform minor repair work, for example. All right. So any installation, alteration, or repair of electrical equipment by homeowner in a single-family home and accompanying outbuildings owned and occupied or to be occupied by the individuals performing the installation, alteration, or repair of electrical equipment. So this one's kind of key. It's the same verbiage that we have under all of the trade licenses, is in that owner occupied or to be occupied. Um, owner of rental property, no, they need a licensed contractor. They shouldn't be doing their own electrical work beyond minor repair work. Um, so this exception here for us mechanical guys and plumbing contractors is kind of important. So work performed by a licensed mechanical contractor or licensed plumbing contractor while performing maintenance, service, repair, replacement, alterations, reconstruction, or upgrading. This is the part that actually allows us to reconnect the furnace or reconnect the air conditioner to the means of disconnect. We can't go beyond that. We can't run new circuits, but this allows us to do that electrical work within the scope of our license. This one is kind of important. They forgot to put this back in mechanical and plumbing, and we'll talk about that a little later. But imagine if this wasn't there, that would mean every time we would go to replace a furnace or an air conditioner, we'd have to have a licensed electrician with us. And we'd probably end up needing two permits with a licensed electrician. I know a lot of communities, including mine here in Westland, we do a reconnect so we can have them, the electrical inspector at least go out and lay eyes on it. I had a lot of issues here where a lot of electrical contractors were pulling and doing circuits and nobody was getting their eyes on them. So that's one reason that I put the reconnect permit back in, kind of slowed that down and stopped that from happening. Uh, so they're not running new circuits. So same thing with electrical, some work that's exempt from the permit. So repairs, minor work, radio, television, transmitting stations, temporary testing systems, um, requiring testing or servicing of electrical equipment and apparatuses. All right. So that was pretty much it on electrical. So that's not too bad. That went quick. Article 8, mechanical. So this is probably the one where we're going to have a lot of discussions, at least I hope. So under the mechanical contractor's license, we have a lot of classifications, more than anybody else. Some of them we see on a regular basis, some of them we don't. And we're going to go through each of the classifications, kind of talk about them, what you can do, what you can't do, what the good, bad, the ugly is, especially under this new act. All right. So the first one, hydronic heating and cooling and process piping. So there's our definition, means the application of equipment and systems which provide air conditioning by the controlled force circulation of fluids or vapors in pipes. So under Article 9 of the boiler inspector, installers, repairers, and operators, stationary engineers, I put this one in there because this is the change that was made that exempted a person with a hydronic heating and cooling process piping from having a boiler installer license to remove a residential boiler that is installed in a residence and exempt from this article under 915 without obtaining a license. So as long as you've got the hydronic heating and cooling process piping, you can do residential boilers. And I believe their classification of residential boilers is in, so it's a steam and vapor boilers carrying a pressure not more than 15 PSGI located in a private residence or in an apartment building with a capacity of fewer than 6 families. So if you're in a five unit apartment building, you can still do it. As soon as it hits that sixth family or sixth apartment, now you got to go back to the state and it's the state's problem. All right. So the authority having jurisdiction would issue the permits and conduct inspections for all residential homes. The boiler division would still issue the permits for apartments. This exclusion is only for boiler installer's license. So the boiler division is still going to do permits for anything that's 6 families and up. And they're still responsible for all the inspections. HVAC equipment. So this category has now become kind of the catch-all.
Roger, can I chime in with a question?
Sure, go for it.
And I'm not going to ask you to go back because I remember reading it. But the exemption for the hydronic heating and cooling includes service. Would that be the case then to say that somebody who is registered to provide service but doesn't have hydronic heating, cooling, process piping has no business under the law touching boiler at all?
My understanding is that um, there's a
Because it's interesting because under limited service, it
correct.
doesn't write that exemption. So it's almost like it's vague.
Yeah. And that was kind of a little bit of a discussion that I had back and forth with the state on it.
Hmm.
And they kind of came down on the side of if you have hydronic, yes, you can service it. If you have the service classifications and you're under that, yes, you can service it. Because you're going to service the boiler side for, the gas valve, the gas heating, and that type of stuff under that service license. And then the hydronic side, I guess, if you have to get into piping,
That
and
makes sense.
replacing any of the piping, now you're back under the hydronic.
Because on the one hand, we don't want to tell people with the best of intentions, no, you can't provide good work for this homeowner. But on the other hand, we
Correct.
don't want people running around putting their hands on things that they have no business touching either.
Exactly. So if they have to do anything with the fluids, the process piping, I would say, beyond maybe the boiler unit itself, then yeah, they're going to have the hydronic. Otherwise, if it's gas valves not firing, controls, you're good with the heating side of it. And I've been in the trades a long time too. You show up, you're in the middle of doing it, and you find out the pump is what's bad. Are you going to walk away? Probably not. You're going to do it, which is one of the things that I kind of brought up to him, and we'll talk about that a little bit more with the service classes. But, we don't require permits on the service classes. So, we really, as inspectors and authorities having jurisdiction, we really don't have a clue who's doing service and if they're doing it in the correct classifications. So we'll see that too when I get to the service classes. All right.
Thanks for taking the time to answer that.
No problem. I love the questions. That's what they're here for. All right. So HVAC equipment, as I said, this one kind of became a catch-all years after I went and got my license. So that means the application of equipment and systems to provide air conditioning for occupants of building structures. HVAC does not include the installation of portable self-contained equipment, window air conditioners of not more than 1.5 horsepower. So the key here, and some of the arguments that we've had in some past classes, is systems to provide air conditioning for occupants. Well, they use this air conditioning term, if you look at it in the definitions, as heating or cooling. You are conditioning the air. It doesn't just mean ACs. Um, and then, as I said, this category is kind of the catch-all. So if you have this classification, you do not need other work classifications except 149 and the service classification. So one is the hydronic heating. So boilers will not fall under HVAC equipment. You have to have the hydronic. And then I don't remember off the top of my head what number four is, but we'll get to that. And then number nine are the specialty licenses. There's a
Or is
that's
refrigeration not for the intention of cooling air for space, but
gotcha.
for storage? And nine is actually fire
Fire
suppression. All the
suppression.
specialties are under 10 now.
Right. Yep. Fire suppression. And then
I
five,
know
six,
because I
seven,
don't
eight.
have nine.
Right. Five, six, seven, eight are the service classes. Okay. So you need number two to install some other equipment that may seem to be under other categories. So you need a number two to install, um, for example, natural fireplace, pellet fireplace qualifies under number two and 10B. Gas-fired whole house generator requires a two and an electrical permit or the gas piping and venting, which is a 10 also, I believe. I got to fix that one. Um, a gas-fired hot water heater and tank requires a 2 or 10E and a plumbing permit. So this one is kind of the one that surprised me, and I actually spent about 7 or 8 emails going back and forth with the state on this. So the state of Michigan, as I said, with that exemption before that we seen in the electrical, in their infinite wisdom in 2016, when they did this, they took that exemption away from plumbing and mechanical. So mechanical is not allowed to touch potable water plumbing, and plumbers are not allowed to do gas piping and venting. So that means if you're going to put in a gas-fired hot water tank, the plumbers can get their permit, but then they need the mechanical guy to get his permit to do the gas piping and venting. So it requires two permits to put in a hot water tank, as if we're getting enough permits for people putting hot water tanks in now, for most of the communities not doing that. Um, I've been kind of working toward putting something together for this. I've also been working with a couple of the plumbing contractors, and I've just talked to one of our state reps to see if we can't get this changed in this act, because it's a little bit ridiculous that you're going to tell a licensed plumbing contractor that no, you can't, you need a mechanical contractor to tie in the gas piping and tie in the venting. And quite frankly, it's a little ridiculous to tell the mechanical guy you can't hook up those two water lines at the unions. It used to be at one point that they used to consider the gas-fired hot water tank almost like a boiler. So, um, you're probably, as this moves forward, if we can't get it changed very soon, you're probably going to have a lot of communities that are going to start requiring the two permits, and you're really going to have some, like me already, some very pissed off contractors. So the electric hot water heaters requires a plumbing permit, possibly an electrical reconnect permit that can be issued to the plumbing contractor if the city wants to do that. But if you remember, they have the exemption under the electrical, so the plumbing contractor can reconnect the electrical. Mechanical contractors cannot install electric hot water heaters. So even though we have the exemption to reconnect the electrical, we don't have the exemption under plumbing to handle anything with potable water. Fire dampers, smoke dampers, duct smoke detectors require a number 2 or a number 3. Those do fall under the ductwork classification also. Anybody got any other examples or questions on this one?
I was going to tell you, you're not the only municipality that says we want a mechanical and a plumbing permit for a water heater. I know Troy does it, Royal Oak does it. I want to say Pleasant Ridge does it.
I think it was Rochester I heard does it.
Possibly.
I hadn't heard, I knew Troy was doing it. I think it
It's
was.
reasonable to say, let's make sure everything's done correctly.
No, it is. And and I get the argument from the plumbers too, you know. I mean, they lost the gas piping when we took over the international codes and we took over the international fuel gas codes, and plumbers couldn't do gas piping anymore. So
Sure, but can't you go the same way that Kurt did for KT or KTM up in like the New Baltimore area and simply get 10 gas piping and venting on your license and still do it as a plumber?
a lot of the plumbers are starting to do that now. So what I did here when I redid this is I actually created a hot water tank permit.
I've seen it. It's very effective for saying this is just what we need.
Exactly. So it's a single permit for hot water tanks. Here's the plumbing contractor. Here's my mechanical. If it's the same guy, here's my mechanical license. I got the 10E or whatever it is. And then we can issue it, and I cut the fees back so you're not hitting two admin fees and two minimum fees. $400 to put in a hot water tank's a little ridiculous. I just need to cover my inspectors, and cover the girls doing the paperwork. So if you do have two separate contractors come in, I still do it for the same fee, even though we then issue two different permits for, mechanical and plumbing. So I'm hoping that catches on. I don't know how Troy does it. I haven't had a chance to call and talk to him. But is since I've kind of made the change, I've already had DTE calling me saying, well, I guess we're not doing any more hot water tanks in Westland, and I've had several other contractors yelling at me too. But I will say I met with Kurt Burton from Burton's Plumbing, and him and I are actually working together to try to come up with the verbiage to give to the legislature to fix this so that way plumbers can do the job without that second permit or mechanical, even if we put it under hydronic, for example, where mechanical guys can still do the hot water tanks too. So,
So, as one of the municipalities that's enforcing it this way, let me ask a hypothetical question because obviously we want solutions for people too.
right.
Is there anything that simply stops one contractor, plumbing, for example, from always working with someone that's mechanical or vice versa on a subcontractor basis to say, we're both going to be liable for this, we're both going to pull this permit, and then it gets inspected?
Yep, absolutely not.
So there's a solution already in place.
There
It's not
is.
the greatest of solutions, but there is a
There
solution
is.
in place, and we have to just
I
come to a
think
dead
part of
stop.
I think part of the complaint is that, with at least on my end, I've tried to make the permit fee reasonable. I mean, it's $250, but
Mhm.
you get a lot of the other ones are going to say, no, we're going to issue you a mechanical, we're going to issue you a plumbing, and you're going to be 350, $400, because I got to do two permits. So, unfortunately, they're selling too many hot water tanks out of Lowe's and Home Depot, and homeowners are already putting them in and not doing it correctly and not getting permits. And the more we drive that permit cost up, the more it's going to make them want to cheat. And, I get that. I've been doing this a long time too. So whatever we can do to try to make it reasonable, I think, and you got somebody that's been a plumbing contractor forever. Really, he can't hook back up to a union or set the flue back on top of the hot water tank. And the same, the mechanical side, I guess we could make that argument one way or the other. So, all right. So ductwork, it basically means air distribution. Everybody knows what ductwork is. Supply return exhaust in an air conditioning system. And in non-air conditioning systems, the materials methods of which are specified in the Michigan Mechanical Code or equivalent national recognized model. Ductwork, believe it or not, does include flues, vents, and chimneys. So a duct cleaning company is supposed to have this classification to make any cuts into ductwork. Again, that's one of those places where we don't get permits for duct cleaners. So how do we know if they do or not? I guess you find out when they mess up the ductwork and we got to go out and look at it. Ductwork's also included under number two under the HVAC equipment. So if you have HVAC equipment, you don't need the ductwork specialty. Number four, refrigeration. So this one is that's the definition, including but not limited to refrigeration piping employing the cycle, generate low temperatures for other than air conditioning. Refrigeration includes but is not limited to equipment systems such as supermarket refrigeration, industrial, all of those. Refrigeration does not include the installation of self-contained units such as refrigerators, dehumidifiers, and other equipment of not more than 1.5 horsepower and equipment exempted from the Michigan Mechanical Code. Um, so you got to see the exemption list. So I have always forced these guys that were putting in these built walk-in coolers and refrigerators to get refrigeration permits. They've tried to make the argument that it's a self-contained unit, and I make the argument back, no, you're bolting your panels together and you're setting the stuff there. The unit you're putting in might be all self-contained, but it's still getting put on that refrigeration unit. And if the unit's on the roof, it's no longer self-contained. They're running line sets, they're running power, so yeah, you need a permit for that. So I don't know how everybody else is hitting them, but I used to always hit them when I was out in the field doing these inspections a lot. So limited heating service and unlimited heating service. So the limited heating service means servicing a gas designed sectional boilers that have inputs of not more than 1 million BTUs utilizing a combustion safeguard designed to shut off the main gas supply 10 or more seconds after the pilot. Equipment and systems limited to input ratings of less than 400,000 BTUs. Oil-fired equipment using number one or number two fuel oil that has a maximum fire rates of 5 gallon per hour, or electric furnaces and electric boilers that use the same kilowatts that are equivalent to the fuel, fossil fuel BTUs. So that kind of answers your question on the boilers too, because it's pretty much in the definition for the limited heating service, and it would be there for the unlimited also. So the unlimited means just that. It's you can service anything not restricted by any thermal capacity. I was actually surprised that they jumped this up when I was looking at it to the million BTUs for the gas design sectional boilers having not more than a million BTUs. I was really surprised. I thought that used to be 500,000. But they've jumped it to a million. But you got to have a boiler installer's license to install that million BTUs. Limited refrigeration and air conditioning service. So this one's going to surprise a lot of people. Limited refrigeration and air conditioning service means the servicing of refrigeration equipment and systems and air conditioning equipment and systems employing the cycle of unlimited capacity utilizing Group 1 refrigerants as listed in the Michigan Mechanical Code or an equivalent national recognized model code.
This changed recently. The
Uh,
wording in this one.
this was the one that I just took out of the act. So unless they've changed it recently in the act, I actually talked to Kelly at the state on this
Mhm.
particular one.
It used to have the verbiage that it was limited to 20 tons of cooling capacity.
Right,
And it changed to saying unlimited and became the refrigerant grouping types instead.
right.
And then there's a mess around that because they're, in this case, talking about groups, but now we still are using, or now we're using, I should say, one and two as far as type, and then your or A and B as far as type, and then your one, two, three as far as flammability classifications, which
Right.
isn't covered by this.
Well, it is. It's saying it has to be non-flammable refrigerants, group one. And I specifically sent this question in through Kelly into the mechanical guys, and they came back and said, you are absolutely correct. We tried to fix this, but they could not fix it. So if all you have is limited refrigeration, you are not supposed to be working on the A2L refrigerants. You're supposed to have the unlimited class for that. So all of these guys out there doing these residential air conditioners and running around doing residential service and only have limited refrigeration service are kind of screwed right now. They shouldn't be doing it. And again, we're not into inspecting service work. So until somebody gets themselves in trouble, um, they're not going to necessarily know it. All right, so safety classification, refrigerants are classified on the toxicity. Flammable group 1 is no flame propagation. Group 2, 2L is low flame. Group 3 is higher. So this results in classifications such as A1, A2L, B2, B3, which guides safe selection handling. So limited is only good for the A1. That's the only thing you can do limited with. The unlimited refrigeration service is just that. It's unlimited. You can do them all. And that's the classification you're supposed to have to service all these A2L systems. Kelly did tell me when I was talking to her that they tried to put the A2L in the limited, and apparently there was some pushback and they wouldn't put it in. They didn't get it passed. So I think they were going to try again. Don't know when, but there is a push, at least from some of the inspectors on the state level, to get this fixed. But right now it isn't fixed. So if you only have limited refrigeration service on your license, you can probably go put in those A2Ls. You just can't service them. Number nine, fire suppression. So the fire suppression system means an integrated combination of fire alarm system and fire suppression equipment that is a result of predetermined temperature, rate of temperature rise, products of combustion, flame, and human intervention will discharge a fire extinguishing substance over a fire area. And then we're into the specialties. So you have solar heating and cooling. So the solar heating and cooling under this classification is established by the board, one or more. And this uses solar thermal systems that capture sunlight to heat water or air, which then circulate through your home for space heating or domestic hot water. So for cooling, solar thermal energy can absorb chillers and descendant systems to produce cooling effect. So this does not include the electrical solar panels that are being put on houses. Those are all under the electrical code and the building codes. Solid fuel equipment and venting decorative gas appliances, that's 10B. Um, so this one means the license under this article, it allows to perform limited within the limits established by the board, one or more work classifications. They did not give us a specific designation, but this is basically your fireplaces that use wood and some of your wood burning furnaces, pellet furnaces would fall under this classification.
Wood burning stove connected to a chimney type thing.
Exactly. And
Okay.
it's also still included in number two. So,
Aren't all of these included in two by definition, all of the towns?
yes, all of these specialties are included in number two. So LP distribution. So that's one that I went back and specifically asked them about. And they come back and said, yes, LP is included in number two. So it's like, okay. But fuel gas, gas piping, venting, so again, it's the same thing. They're all under number two.
I remember because it wasn't all that long ago. Um, all of the questions for those specialty ones are on
Yes.
the equipment exam.
Yep. Yep. So, uh, designation as a contractor of record. This part here is a little bit of a mess right now. The state of Michigan, when they changed systems, for some reason, they lost in mechanical the ability on the mechanical license to designate someone as a contractor of record. So all of our mechanical licenses, contractor licenses right now are coming out in our name and they're not showing that I'm a designated contractor for, ABC heating and cooling or whatever it is. The state is working on fixing it. They told me that they plan to have it corrected by the time they send out the next licenses. Um, this does create an issue for the authorities having jurisdiction because, if I'm bringing the license in, I have very little control over attaching that license to a contractor. And now all of a sudden I've got this licensee that's probably in here pulling permits for 10 different mechanical contractors. And I've caught two or three of them already, and they're usually ones that I already have problems with not pulling permits and not doing things correctly.
Roger, doesn't the Laura page for this actually show if you're designated as the C of R for somewhere?
I don't know if they've got it fixed yet. It wasn't, and that was one of the things as I was looking them up, I brought up to Lara when I was talking to them. And they admitted that this has been broken since they fixed the system and went over to Excella to do their licenses. And they supposedly have a fix for it. But I don't know if they lost all that information from the old system and if now they're going to have to send it back out. So everybody, when they renew their license, they're going to have to put the company names back on them again. So that I think is where they're trying to figure out where the break is at right now, is bringing the old information over, or did they lose it?
I think some of it's there, but searching by business name is a pain on there because if the spelling is not,
Perfect. You
or the
don't,
spaces, God forbid somebody didn't enter a space right.
yeah, yep. So you are supposed to still designate being the contractor of record, and you're only supposed to be the contractor of record for one company, and not be out there selling your license. This is a huge problem on the mechanical side as a authority having jurisdiction and seeing this all the time. It is a big problem. Um, so. Uh, So this one I spent some time with Lara on also, the installation of heating and refrigeration systems by owner of a single family dwelling. So basically, the owner of a single family dwelling that is, or on completion will become his or her place of residency, may personally install a heating or refrigeration system in the dwelling if that individual in his or her application for affirms that he or she will become the owner or occupant of the dwelling in which the installation is done and completed. So I very specifically ask them, as the authority having jurisdiction, can I deny an owner occupant permit for mechanical equipment for just reason? And the example I gave them is that I have the 75-year-old little lady standing in front of me trying to pull her mechanical permit, because it says in here that you are the one doing the installation. So now convince me that the little 75-year-old lady can do it. The state told me I can, with just cause, deny a homeowner permit. In fact, they said they were trying to get this changed because apparently they thought the only ones that could buy HVAC equipment were licensed contractors. So how are homeowners getting their hands on the equipment? And I had to kind of inform them that we do still have some wholesale houses that are basically selling to anybody that comes in with the cash,
Isn't
although
there
most,
another concern with the refrigeration side of this as
and that
well?
was the second side of it
They're
too.
going to be touching
Now,
the refrigeration. Do they have an EPA cert? Which doesn't matter for pulling the permit, but you certainly don't want the little 75-year-old lady trying to do the refrigeration part of that and putting refrigerant in and freezing her face.
correct. And that was kind of the second part of it is, even if it isn't the 75-year-old little old lady, how can I allow the homeowner to pull the permit unless he can prove to me that he can install that air conditioner, which requires specific steps with vacuum pumps and equipment and, EPA cards and all this other stuff. So, and I've denied a few, since I've talked to the state. And I think if more and more of the authorities start doing that and start denying it, we might get some of this unlicensed work under control. So some key wording in this section that allows us to deny the permit to the owner is personally install. Applicant will install the equipment. So with those two verbiages in there, it gives us, the ability to do that. And then I did specifically ask about the A2L refrigerants and installing the equipment. The state said they would back us up on the decision not to allow an owner to install. An example was an elderly person that obviously would not be a physical means to do the work. All right,
What
so
do you
we're
do when you find out that the little old lady pulled the permit after somebody else did it, who, for example, works for another company but themselves isn't licensed and they're doing all this on the side? You've got a right mess where the person's trying to do the right thing, but it was all wrong to begin with.
so I will tell you that here I have written tickets to several contractors or supposed contractors that did their work without permits or tried to get homeowners to pull their permits. I actually just did a very large state complaint against a plumbing person who is fairly well known to a lot of the plumbing contractors around because he spends his day in the plumbing supply houses trying to get people to pull permits for him. The guy didn't make 1 year as an apprentice, but now he's out there running around saying he's a plumbing contractor with a truck and signage and everything else. And so I just wrote that state complaint and sent it to the state for unlicensed workers. So I'm waiting to see what the state does with that. The state's a bit of a mess right now. They've kind of tied our hands on some of this stuff because we have to send those complaints into them when we catch these contractors doing work that are unlicensed. Um, and then depending on the person that gets it, this one, they actually sent the letter back to the homeowner saying, well, the guy's not licensed, so we don't have jurisdiction. We can't do anything. So I called Kelly up, who's the manager for the Act 407 and some of the other acts with Lyra. And she said, yeah, I seen that. She said, I've been screaming at people all morning. I'll get it fixed. It's like you won't let us write it, as authority having jurisdiction. Before, when I was still the mechanical inspector, I actually had a guy that did this would have been 2008, actually did a $40,000 heating and cooling job on a house here in Westland. And I brought the city detectives in, and we went after him for fraud. And they ended up arresting him and prosecuting him for the fraud. It was large enough, and that was before the state made the changes where a lot of this stuff has to go to the state now.
Wouldn't the first and easiest way to prevent the situation be at the time of application when you're telling that homeowner, you're telling me you haven't done the work yet, and you're the one that's going to do it because you're the one that's liable for this if you pull this permit,
My
and
secretary,
try to dissuade them then because those people seem like they're not going to have done it.
my secretaries know they're supposed to come and get me whenever they get a homeowner mechanical permit, and I have a very long conversation with that person standing at the counter before I decide whether they're going to get that permit or not. And I do that with a lot of the homeowner permits, not just mechanical, but definitely with mechanical, even with all of the other ones, and so, well, the guy told me it was cheaper if I pulled it. And I said, do you see a discount anywhere on this form for homeowner? Well, no. And I said, so if they're telling you to come pull the permit, that tells me they're probably not licensed, they're probably not insured, and you're putting yourself at great risk of doing this. And I have had people walk out and cancel their contracts before, but I try to, and I'm not here every day. I'm out in the field, I'm doing other things, but we do a newsletter. So every couple of newsletters, I send out the same thing every time. Beware of, unlicensed contractors. And every time I do that is when I start getting the phone calls. I had, you know, such and such heating and cooling company did the work, and your girls tell me they didn't get a permit. Now what do I do? I had 8 of them going at one time here about 3 weeks ago, and I think I've gotten all of them now have gotten their permits. One was a 6-year-old job that they never got permits on and had a bunch of violations on that we finally got in and inspected, you know. So it takes a lot of extra time, and that's part of the problem is, for us authorities having jurisdiction, the building officials and even the inspectors, we're all busy, we're all shorthanded, but unfortunately, hopefully the communities are allowing the inspectors to take this on, and go after these guys and send violations and send notices and even write tickets when we can when they don't get their permits and they don't do it right. So. All right, so work exempt from a permit under the mechanical code. There is quite a list. It is minor parts that do not alter the approval of the equipment. It's one of the big ones, steam, hot water, chilled water piping within the system or appliances regulated by the code. Portable cooling, portable fuel cell appliances that are not connected to a system. Oil burners that do not require connection to a flue, such as an oil stove or heater equipped with a wick. Um, Portable gas burners, changing or relocating gas meters. Um, so this is a pretty, you know, I think we're all pretty familiar with this list of what we don't have to do. So that pretty much kills the mechanical side of it.
Isn't there effective the 2021 mechanical code cycle no longer exemption for heat exchangers? Don't you have to pull a permit per that to replace a heat
There's
exchanger in a furnace?
There's actually never been an exemption for heat exchangers.
It just got called out as being required now.
Yeah, it may just have gotten called out to be required, because none of us were doing it. I mean, it's never been exempt from permitting, um, you know, but nobody's ever really gotten permits for it to do it. Because it automatically states in here replacement of a minor part that does not alter the approval of the equipment or appliance makes such equipment or appliance unsafe. So, it it doesn't give you an exemption when you're doing a major part on the furnace. It says a
Right.
minor part,
I'm
so
looking at the 2021 Michigan Mechanical Code, and
mhm,
they rearranged some of the numbers when they did this. What was 105 is now 106. But it
yeah.
goes in and says under permits not required, it specifically now states, except for heat exchangers, the replacement of any manufacturer installed part that is considered minor, etc. So they call it out specifically now as no longer being something exempt.
So I copied this off of the 2015 residential code because that's really what
Hmm.
we're all still doing when it comes to, houses. Unfortunately,
Right.
I'd love to enforce the 21 code in the houses. We can't yet.
Right.
But yes, commercially, but see, that goes back to the same argument of, the electrical and plumbing guys have to do continuing education. The mechanical guys don't.
They
So
should.
at what time are the mechanical contractors going to find all this stuff out that we just went through? That they're not supposed to be working on A2L systems if they only have limited heating services. They're supposed to get permits if they're going and changing heat exchangers on rooftops and commercial units right now, and they should probably be doing it on residential because it only comes out minor parts. So they should be pulling a permit for heat exchangers even on residential, even under the 2015 code. But when they're not required to go in and learn anything, we get our license and we just go on about our business. I tell everybody I started inspecting in 2004 as mechanical inspector here in Westland, and I started going to our meetings for the MIAM and MMIA. And after that first meeting, when I walked out the door, I was blown away as to how much I did not know. And I had been doing mechanical since 1989, and that was 2004 that I went to my first meeting. And it just blew me away as to how much I truly didn't know about what I was doing. So it blows my mind that we don't have continuing education for mechanical. All right, so the last section here is plumbing. That doesn't take very long. It's a quick one to get through. Um, So plumbing contractor, master plumber, journeyman plumber, basically the same thing as the electrical side. And this is the other side that blows me away. Why is electrical and plumbing almost identical on the contractor licenses and apprentices and journeyman, but mechanical isn't? If you're rewriting this thing, why wouldn't you have done all three of them the same? So I've been yelling about putting journeymen and apprentices in mechanicals since probably 2005, and nobody seems to listen. So plumbing,
Wouldn't that solve one more problem for a mechanical?
it
There's
would
a
solve a lot
formal
of problems for
process
mechanical.
for tracking the time, issuing those cards. You could be an apprentice for 4 years, test for journeyman, change companies, you retain your journeyman.
Correct.
If I had an employee right now who worked for me for 10 years and God forbid something terrible happens to me and I die or lose my ability to speak or can't move my arms or maybe I'm just an asshole and I don't think I am, but maybe you know that guy and I won't sign for his time. Now
Yep.
he's got to try and jump through hoops and convince the board that he worked for me. There's no formal process that recognizes time worked in mechanical.
They've gotten a little easier with that they do allow you now to turn in like pay stubs. There's other ways around it.
But it's really enforced.
Correct. You're still jumping through 50,000 hoops, and that's what took me so long even to get my mechanical contractor's license. The guy that I worked for starting in 1989 made it pretty clear he didn't sign for anybody. It didn't matter if you worked for him for 5 minutes or 50 years. He was not signing for you to go take that test because you weren't going to be his competition. So, yes, that was the way it was back in the late 80s and early 90s. So, um, hopefully at some point, the problem is that I think the mechanical guys don't like change and they're afraid that if you put this in, that it will screw up how many people we have in the trade. Personally, I think it'll just help us. I mean, you're going to get more qualified guys. You're not going to be hiring guys off the street that doesn't know which end of a hammer to use. and you'll see it in the installations. It will fix them. We've got the trade school right here in Westland that does plumbing and electrical for the non-union guys. They've tried bringing in mechanical, but since there's no requirement for them to do continuing education or do an apprenticeship or a journeyman program, they never get anybody to sign up. They've asked me for years to come over and teach the mechanical side, and it's like, well, I'm not going to show up for one guy, just I ain't got time for that. Um, so yeah, I've been preaching that for years that we need to fix this. All right, so plumbing is pretty much the same thing. So you've got a plumbing contractor and then that master plumber. So the plumbing contractor does not even have to be a journeyman. It could be your wife if you want, and as long as she hires a master plumber, you're good. They're good to go. Um, so a license under this article is not required to perform the jumped kind of quick. Minor repair work, installation of a building sewer or water pipe if a permit is secured from a responsible enforcing agency and inspections are performed. The installation shall comply with the applicable parts of the state code. So you do not need to be a licensed plumber to do a service or water or to do a sewer or water service pipe. And I have to issue the permit. That blew me away when I learned that. The installation of domestic water treatment and filtering equipment, that didn't really surprise me too much. You got all these guys out there putting that stuff in. Um, Modification to an existing cold water distribution supply and associated waste piping in a building if a permit is secured. Required inspections performed and the installation complies with the applicable parts of the state construction code. But yet mechanical contractor can't reconnect the hot water tank to the potable water. The installation by a homeowner for his or her own plumbing, building sewer or private sewer in his or her single family home if the permit's secured. The installation of medical gas piping if the installation is performed under the supervision of a licensed plumber. That was a change. You used to have a special medical gas piping license to do that medical gas piping. Um,
I thought medical gas was covered under mechanical process piping.
nope. This article does not prevent a person from performing any activities within the scope of licensure or registration under any other licensure or registration act applicable for the licensed or registered professional adopted pursuant to code. Plumbing contractor license. The conditions to qualify for a plumbing contractor license, the applicant must either hold a master plumber license or employ the holder of a master plumber license as his or her representative. So I actually had a guy come in to get a plumbing permit that was a plumbing contractor, and we asked him for the master license, and he didn't have one. And he had another guy come in as the master plumber. The problem was is his master plumber license said he was master plumber for another contractor. So the guy was really not happy with me when I told him, no, you can't have the permit until your master plumber, who's registered to your contracting company, comes in. And so the other guy finally pulled the permit for him, which I wasn't real happy about. But I did call the state and let them know that this particular plumbing contractor did not have a master. And they actually looked him up and they said, you know what, Roger, you're right. He doesn't have a master plumber. And it's like, really, guys? You don't like track this? So only an individual who is a sole proprietor, partner in partnership, an officer of a corporation, or a member of a limited liability company may apply for licensure as a plumbing contractor. So they're going to issue the plumbing contractor's license to individuals who does all of the following: files the complete application on the right form, statement listing the complete address of each place of business, the name of the individual who is applying for the license, the name of the business, and the location of the place for which the license is desired, the name of the business owner, president, corporation, whatever. Um, if it's different than the name of the business, name, resident address, and license number of the licensed master plumber who represents the person, pays all the money. Oops, excuse me. Stop. Too far. Yeah, pays the applicable examination fee under section 207 and passes an examination provided by the board, and the department pays the license fee described in Article 4. So I guess the good thing is they do give them a test. I'm not sure what the test is going to provide if they're not the master plumber or a journeyman or an apprentice. Um, Might be how to write a check. I don't know. Licensed plumbing contractor may operate one or more branch offices under the same business. If the last licensed master plumber is in charge and has the responsibility of supervision at each branch, um, licensee is issued a plumbing contractor represented by master plumber. The plumbing contractor and the master plumber are jointly and severally responsible for exercising the supervision and control of the plumbing operations. Both a person, unless the person is a plumbing contractor, and master plumber are jointly and severally responsible for exercising supervision or control of the plumbing operations necessary to secure compliance. You must have both the contractor and a master to apply for the permit. So then you have your journeyman, pretty much the same things on the other side. Got to be at least 18, file a completed application, have at least 6,000 hours of experience gained over a period of 3 years as an apprentice, supervision of a master plumber while serving in the armed forces. You can use that classification to help get into your journeyman too, which is pretty cool. And it tells you how to do that. Individual who's employed as an apprentice plumber has to register. Apprentice registration is invalid after 5 years from the date of initial registration unless the registered apprentice applies for and takes the examination for a journeyman. So you can only be apprentice for 5 years. If you can't take the test, you need to find a new job. The registration of apprentice is applied for. The journeyman license is valid after the 5 year period until either a license is issued or the apprentice fails to take the examination. On request by the apprentice to the board may grant an extension for a period of time to determine appropriate by the board. Apprentice plumber shall, at his or her principal occupation, be engaged in learning and assisting the installation of plumbing under the direct on-site job supervision of a journeyman or master. So, any inspector may enforce the appropriate master journeyman ratio. Same thing under electrical. For plumbing, it's 2 apprentices to each master journeyman. So there should only be one guy standing there leaning on a shovel with 2 guys digging. That's kind of an easy way to figure that one out. Plumbing contractors licensed under this article to perform work in the governmental subdivision shall register his or her license with the enforcing agency. So plumbing, much like mechanical, they give you a $15 not to exceed fee to be paid. A lot of communities are still trying to bump that up on mechanical and plumbing because they can on building and electrical. There is no limit. So this is a kind of a big one, and most of our plumbing inspectors know it, that if they're employed or licensed under this article and employed or acting as a plumbing inspector shall not engage in or directly or indirectly connected with the plumbing business, including but not limited to furnishing labor, material, appliances for the construction, alteration, maintenance of a building. So they can't continue to work as a plumber if they're going to be an inspector. And then a work exempt from permits for plumbing. Pretty much minor stuff, stopping of leaks, clearing of stoppages, repairing leaks and stuff. Reinstallation of a water closet if repairs do not require the replacement of rearrangement of valves, pipes, or fixtures. And that is the end. Not too bad. I got it done in under 2 hours.
I know I'm the one that keeps chiming in. I have
That's
some
okay,
a
Josh. Go ahead.
question about one word that keeps showing up. It shows up in mechanical, plumbing, and electrical.
Mhm.
It says that the contractor of record, and then it lists what they could be. And one of those things is sole proprietor, owner, partner, officer of the corporation. What
right?
does that one mean? And by
The
that I mean,
last one.
if we start talking about officer of the corporation,
So
and you're limited to providing your license to one company, can that company employ you in that capacity, but you have no say in the work? That seems like it wouldn't fit that.
um, okay. So you kind of go back a little bit to building. Under building, if you are a corporation, all the officers of the corporation are supposed to have a residential license also. I think that they were trying to head that way under the other trades, but fell short of that designation. However, they left the designation in there that a officer of the corporation can hold the license, or like it said for plumbing and electrical, the corporation can be the contractor as long as you have a master plumber hired into the corporation. So the master does not have to be an officer of the corporation. So the corporation is just only like another individual. It just makes it harder for us to write them tickets is all it is. So a corporation isn't another individual. They're just calling out that individual in those ways. So like mechanical, for example, if your company is a corporation, uh, then typically one of the officers would hold the license, but it doesn't restrict it to where it only can be an officer to hold the license. You have to still hire someone in that company to hold the license, and he has to register his license as the license holder for that corporation.
I mean, that makes sense. And there's a legal definition for a corporation and how it all works. And that's an actual registered business entity.
Correct.
I was just so surmising, let's say a company that had a board and a bunch of managers couldn't use the license of one of its lowest, not in charge of anything employees because they have no jurisdictional control or span of control over the work being done.
Well, actually, they can, and a good example of that is DTE Energy. I
Oh,
mean,
you mean how Greg Pinto's a supervisor there, but he's not in charge of everything everywhere.
correct,
And
but
his is the license attached to the Michigan ID number.
correct. And he's the license number attached to the DTE gas side, and he runs or is in charge of, or he's the one that we got to get a hold of if we have code problems. The guy sitting in the corporate office isn't going to do anything. He's going to pick the phone up, call that guy, and say, "Hey, you're the license holder. Go deal with it." you know. So it worked. That's kind of the way it works. I mean, you don't even, that guy isn't on that corporate board for DTE. He's an employee, and his responsibility is to be the license holder. So where the corporation would hold um, jurisdiction then is if that gentleman also went and pulled a license for, let's say, to go do work as a contractor, um, then he could get himself in trouble with DTE because he's DTE's contractor. Your hours, you can't go do this for anybody else. That kind of makes sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I was just a little bit hung up on we're looking at laws, and laws use words with very specific meanings, and then
Correct.
wondering, did they mean what they said, or were we playing copy paste and hope it made sense?
Right. No, it means what it says. I mean, a corporation and just by definition is an individual. I mean, it operates under the same rules, laws, and definitions as you and I do.
It
Um,
was more the officer of the corporation part that
correct.
I was questioning.
Yeah. So the officers, depending, and this is the part that gives us a hard time, because here we're allowed to issue uh, some misdemeanor tickets. A lot of our stuff is civil infractions. So where it becomes difficult for us is it's hard for me to issue a civil infraction to a corporation. Who am I issuing it to? Okay, under that corporate umbrella. I have to find the proper person responsible for, so like the DTE, I know who that licensed contractor is. So I can issue it to that license holder now. But kind of a more indirect one, we do a lot of rental certs here, and a lot of our rental properties are owned by corporations in other states. If they basically say, screw you, Roger, we're not doing your rental program, now I've got to jump through all kinds of hoops to find out who in that corporation I can write a ticket to drag them into our local court, which they would never show up anyways. They'd send their corporate attorney to try to blow up whatever I did. But it throws that extra level of protection in for the people under that corporate umbrella, because the corporation
Just
has to
want to
be an
buzz.
individual
Number
on its own. All right.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have any questions, comments? All right. I'm done. If nobody else has any other questions or anything, we can kind of put this to bed and they can get it put up on the website now. Thank you guys very much for coming out, and
Thanks for putting this one on for us.
hopefully it was good. I wanted to suggest to everybody too that this will be online, but I did this class for my own permit techs, and they absolutely loved it. It answered a ton of questions for them being able to issue permits, and help people at the counter and understand why they're doing what they're doing. So any of the communities, if you guys, I can do another Zoom or whatever, if the permit techs want to jump in and learn all of this stuff too, it's certainly worth their while because they're the ones at the front line. A lot of times we as inspectors don't see the permits when they're getting issued, and the secretaries, you'd be amazed. Once I did this class for the secretaries up front that were doing the permits, they stopped almost 20 people in 1 month in mechanical from getting permits because they didn't have the right license. They were coming in pulling permits because they had a limited heating service or an unlimited heating service, and then they'd want to stand up there and argue with me. Well, I get them all the time in this community, and it's like, well, you won't now because I'll be calling them after you walk away from the counter to let them know you don't have the right license. So, um, so we have to remember that they need our support up front also. They need to learn this stuff, and we have to train them and teach them and look at when we're out doing inspections, we can look in there. Hopefully, they're putting the information in if you're using BSNA. They're putting the information in there what their licenses are so we can see it. And if we see as inspectors it was issued to the wrong license, we need to go tell the ladies and explain it to them why they can't do it. And then, obviously we want to make sure that we're inspecting work and that it's getting done by the people that hold the proper licenses, which is kind of why, I wanted to put this on. And then, we had the one meeting several months ago that there were a lot of arguments back and forth on what each of these sections meant. So it was kind of important. I wanted to get it done, put it out there so we all could be on the same page and know what it is. So. All right. So if anybody, wants this, needs anything, you'll find me at City of Westland. That's where I reside most of my days, and I'd be happy to help out however I can. All right.
Thanks for putting this on, Roger.
No problem, Josh. Thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for joining in, and we're all done. Have a good one.